Okay, Savvy, you are made to the closed captioner, so hopefully that's going to work for you and we won't have any mess ups like last time.
This one is doing a weird color thing.
Was it from somebody's or?
It was Maria's.
Okay. Oops.
It would be really great. Yeah, that's okay. That would be awesome.
All right, we ready? Good evening. We will bring the Assembly Reorganization meeting for October 24th, 2022 to order. Mr. Smith, will you lead us in the flag salute, please?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. That's what you get when you're the number one vote getter. You gotta say the flag salute. Madam, Ms. Gladaszewski, would you do the land acknowledgement?
Yes, thank you, Madam Mayor. We would like to acknowledge that the city and borough of Juneau is on Tlingit land and wish to honor the indigenous people of this land. For more than 10,000 years, Alaska Native people have been and continue to be integral to the well-being of our community. We are grateful to be in this place, a part of this community, and to honor the culture, traditions, and resilience of the Tlingit people. Gunolchish.
Thank you, Ms. Gladaszewski. Madam Clerk, will you call roll?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Bryson,
Present.
Ms. Hale,
Here.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
Here.
Mr. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Treem,
Here.
Ms. Wall,
Present.
Walla Kida.
Here.
You, Ms. Gladaszewski
Here.
and Mayor Weldon.
Here.
A quorum is present.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. So with that will bring us to the special order of business. First of all, our Assembly Reorganization. Mr. Palmer, I believe you're up. And would the three of you meet him down front?
Right. If you'll repeat after me, we'll do a swearing in and then we'll have some fun. So I, your name, do solemnly affirm.
I,
Wade
Charles
Bryson,
James,
do solemnly affirm
That I will support the constitutions of the United States, of America and state of Alaska.
That I will support the constitutions of the United States of America and Alaska
And laws of the state of Alaska and the city and borough of Juneau.
and the laws of the state of Alaska and city and borough of Juneau,
Faithfully, honestly, and promptly.
and that I will faithfully, honestly, and promptly perform the duties opposite of assembly.
I will remind you guys of that promptly later in your tenure. With that, it brings us to our election of our deputy mayor. Mr. Bryson, you have a nomination.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would like to nominate Maria Gladaszewski to the post of Deputy Mayor. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Any objections or other nominations? Seeing none. Thank you, Ms. Gladaszewski, for being the deputy mayor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Assembly members, appreciate it.
All right, with that, if everybody but Ms. Gladaszewski and I could step down and we'll call you up one by seniority to pick your new spots. Yeah. Ms. Treem. Ms. Hale. She's making a bold move. Apparently you need supervision. Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Smith.
Sorry,
Ms. Wall. And Wahalgadock, you will be between Ms. Treem and Ms. Wall when you feel better. And with that, we will pass out the committees and liaisons. And when everybody gets a chance to look at them, no surprises to anybody, I am sure. I believe yours will be in an email, Wahalgadock, from Madam Clerk. And when you're ready, Ms. Lashewski.
And for those of you in the room, we are putting some on the back table here.
Let it get down.
I would say.
Go ahead.
You guys. Ready?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move the committee, the 2022-23 Assembly Committee and Liaison appointments as indicated on the piece of paper that was just handed out. I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objections? Seeing none, those are approved. Thank you, Ms. Gladszewski. With that, we are done with our organization. In your red folder, I believe you have a seniority list and some of the documentation behind it, because Madam Clerk is very thorough. With that, do we have our exchange students? I believe so. Who is bringing them up? There we are. Are you Mr. Rothman? Come on up. Or actually, why don't you come on over there if you need to speak and.
Where's our camera? Anyway. So I wanted to thank the members of the Assembly for taking some time to recognize our exchange students who are being citizen ambassadors with us for this year. My name is Dune Rothman, and I'm a volunteer with the American Field Service, AFS. We also have exchange students here with us today from Rotary. And I think those are the only organizations we have today, but there are actually several active around Juneau. And I wanted to take a moment and let the students introduce themselves.
Yep, but they get to come up. They get to come up. Please tell us your name and area of town, or not area of town, sorry. The area of the world you're from and anything that surprised you so far about Juneau.
Hi guys, my name is Wasik Malik. I come from Jammu and Kashmir, India. I like this town. I have been here for like 3 months. I'm living with Susan Sabataj, Bob Sabataj. These are my host family. And I love it here. The only thing that surprised me is kind of like unusual for me is getting dark too early, and it will get darker way too early. That's the thing. That's the thing. Like I'm kind of
Okay,
not
well,
feeling good about that's, but I made some pretty good friends from even from middle school to from college, from UAE and high schoolers. I love them. Yeah, thank you.
well, welcome, Mr. Malik.
Hey, I'm Anna. I am an exchange student from Brazil. I am with Rotary Club and my host father, he's here, Steve. So one thing that I really liked here and I didn't expect was the bears and the glacier. And I am really excited for the snow and I know that it's coming, so I'm really happy.
Well, good. Welcome. And I don't think you said your last name, but we'll call you Anna. Scopel. You have to press the green. There we go. Press the button so it turns green. Yep. Wait. Now it is. Now it's good.
My name is Dani Schilling. I'm from Hamburg, Germany. And yeah, I'm really excited for the snow and the winter, and I'm happy to be here.
Well, welcome is Schilling, and you watch the snow come down the mountains.
Yes.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gotze Dmitriev. I'm coming from North Macedonia, and it is a pleasure of mine to be here with you tonight. The one thing that has already surprised me about Juneau is the unrealistic nature you guys have. It is really amazing, and it's really beautiful here. Yeah,
Well, thank you and welcome. I'll try this. Dmitriev.
thanks.
Close, pretty close. Well, welcome to you all. Do you have anything more, Mr. Rothman? Yeah.
I just wanted to take a quick minute to recognize the host parents here and thank everybody who has opened their homes to exchange students. It's always great when we can find host families that are precious to our exchange organizations. And thank Juneau for opening their doors and being very welcoming. So, Gunocish.
Thank you. And would you lead the procession past everybody and people can either shake hands or bump elbows, however, whatever you feel comfortable with. Thank you for coming. Thank you.
Thank you for organizing.
It's great to have these nice young faces from different countries since after COVID, we didn't see Sadie for a while. So welcome, welcome. Madam Clerk, will you give introductions for public participation?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The agenda for tonight, which is posted on our website at juneau.org, is available, and the Zoom link for the meeting for tonight is on that agenda. For those individuals who are participating via Zoom, we did have to have you sign up to testify in advance no later than 4 p.m. today. We did not have any advanced signups for public testimony via Zoom today. But members of the public are welcome to Zoom in to watch the meeting. They can watch it on YouTube Live or also listen in on our local radio stations. For those individuals in the room who would like to testify, there has been a sign-up sheet. We can make it available again if anyone missed the opportunity to testify. And I will hand over that testimony sheet to you at this time, Madam Mayor.
Thank you. All right, so next we go to the manager's request for agenda changes, and I believe you have one, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. One request. I'd like to remove from the consent agenda item H8 ordinance for introduction and just pull that from the agenda. Thank you.
Which one?
H8. Eight on the consent agenda, the ordinance temporarily.
2022-57.
Thank you.
All right, anything further, Mr. Manager?
Nothing further. Thank you.
Okay, next we'll go to public participation on non-agenda items. And at this time, we only have one person, so we'll give you 3 minutes. Mr. Shaw, come on up to the mic. Please state your name and area. Yes, we did. Please state your name and area of town you live in. And you'll have 3 minutes once you start.
My name is Albert Shaw, and I want the record to show that I was here this evening to push the administration and assembly to craft ASAP an ordinance to start the process of buying out structures in slide and avalanche areas. I would gladly work with the administration and assembly on this issue. The Gaston Avenue slide was a wake-up call. The next slide could be in 15 minutes or 15 years. Rather than the barefoot in the mud, it could be dead bodies. I could be the last person standing who saw the mud against the cold storage. That slide destroyed structures and bodies were recovered from the hill slide. Predicting slides is an art, not a science. Thank you for letting me talk. Are there any questions?
That's my line. Are there any questions for Mr. Davis? Or Mr. Shaw, sorry. Seeing none, thank you for your testimony.
When you get around to the city hall, I'll talk about that too. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, is there anybody else in the room that wants to testify on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we will move on to the consent agenda. Are there any public requests for consent agenda changes other than ordinances for introduction? Seeing none. For the assembly request, we are going to move poll, let's see here, which one is it? Number 11, resolution 3004, because we have someone that would like to testify on that one. So any other requests from the assembly? Seeing none, assembly action, Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move the consent agenda as amended with the removal of items 8 and 11.
Pardon me, sorry. I forgot. I have to recuse myself from item, let's see here, which one is it? Item 12, bid RFB, as my son worked for Dawson Construction in the summer. So when I vote on this, I will be voting on the consent agenda, but not on that item. Go ahead, Ms. Gladysevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, for the clarification. I move the consent as amended, including removal of items 8 and 11. I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, the consent agenda is approved. So that brings us to public hearing, and the first item we will do is resolution 3004. So Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Resolution 3004, a resolution encouraging federal agencies in Juneau to coordinate collection of biometric information for foreign national employees and refugee families.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
Refugee families like from Ukraine and foreign national employees like in the seafood industry are required to submit biometric information, pictures and fingerprints. Currently, they have to travel from Juneau to either Anchorage or Seattle, which creates a financial burdens for them, their employers, and local nonprofits. However, the Juneau Office of U.S. Customs and Border Protections has the ability to collect the biometric information. This resolution encourages the two federal agencies to coordinate, which will decrease fiscal hardships to Ukraine refugee families, seafood industry employers and employees, and local nonprofits. I recommend you adopt resolution 3004.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Ms. Carrillo, would you step up and? Would you please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you might tell everybody a little bit who you are.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor. Madam Mayor, good evening, everyone. My name is Rebecca Carrillo. I live in the Mendenhall Valley. I've worked for the state for 33 years and retired in 2018. I currently work as the Philippine Honorary Consul for Alaska. I only have 3 minutes, so I'm not going to use that 3 minutes to go over the resolution as has been gone over already. I just would like to encourage the Assembly to please support the adoption of this resolution. Although the impetus, as it was stated, is to support the needs of Ukrainian refugees and seafood workers, I also would like to bring to your attention that Filipinos and Filipino Americans who are going through their consular paperwork also has to have their biometrics taken. They have to either fly to San Francisco or wherever in the country there is a Philippine consulate to have their biometrics taken. And the nearest place to us, of course, is Anchorage. They have to take leave from work and incur all the relevant attendant expenditures to get this taken. The infrastructure to have this done here in Juneau already exists, as stated, at the Customs and Border Protection offices, both at the dock and at the airport. So we would be very, very thankful as the Filipino community and here in Alaska, as well as elsewhere in the nation, for those who come here to work in the summer in our seafood and customer service sector industries. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for Ms. Carrillo? See none? Oh, wait, Ms. Deputy Mayor.
Just ask one, the language in the resolution would cover the people that you're concerned about, correct? It says refugees and foreign national employees in Juneau.
The only question I have with that is it says foreign seafood seafood industry employers.
The action part of this resolution is in section 1, and it says encourages those agencies to coordinate biometric information for refugees and foreign national employees in Juneau. Would that cover the people that you're concerned about?
Not necessarily, because if we have a grandmother who's 65 years old and she wants to become a dual citizen or wants to renew her passport, she's no longer working, obviously, but she still would have to appear and have her biometrics taken.
Okay, thank you.
Mr.
We're gonna
Palmer,
ask Mr.
Mr.
Palmer,
Palmer, do
yeah.
we need to do anything further, or if the center is open, would that work? Help us, Mr. Palmer.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Ms. Carrillo. If we want to expand this, I'd probably have to go back and redraft a different one, but that's no problem. We can definitely do that. So it's up to the will of the body if you want to adopt one or two.
Can't we amend this to add a foreign refugees, foreign national employees, and whatever the other clause would be, but you can't make up on the second, is that what you're saying?
Exactly.
Okay.
But we could pass this one and then you could do another one that would collect.
Yes.
Ms. Carrillo's. Okay, perfect.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Bryson,
couldn't we just remove the word employee and leave it at foreign nationals? So that way, whether they're working or not. And then you don't, Mr. Palmer doesn't have to redraft anything if we just.
Mr. Palmer, are you comfortable with that, or would you still like to research that?
The tricky piece is that foreign national employees is actually in the title.
No. Okay, so is everybody okay with moving this along and then, oh, sorry, Ms. Dream, I didn't see your hand. Thought you're.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just had a question. We got an email from Mayor Botello today with some concerns. Have those been
We're going
addressed?
to talk about that in 2 seconds.
Oh, okay.
It's his email had to do with just who we send it to, and we'll just make sure on the record we state, excuse me, who it's going to get sent to. So it looks like, well, Ms. Gladaszewski, I'll have you make the motion because I can't make the motion.
I would move resolution 3004 and ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Gladaszewski. And for the record, we will add that the resolution and to include copies sent to Alaska's congressional delegation, the Honorable URM Jadot, Director, United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, and the Honorable Chris Magnus, Commissioner, United States Customs and Border Protection. So with that, any objections to Ms. Gladaszewski, with the understanding that we will have to have Mr. Palmer work with Ms. Carrillo to make sure others that may have been missed on this one get included. Okay, seeing none, that motion is approved. So moving on to item 14 under public hearing. Madam Clerk, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2021-08, version B as amended AU. An ordinance appropriating $7,127,047 to the manager to fund the city and borough of Juneau and Bartlett Regional Hospital's fiscal year 2022 public employees retirement system contribution. Funding provided by the Alaska Department of Administration.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance would appropriate $7,127,047 for the state of Alaska's fiscal year 22 8.11% PERS benefit rate paid on behalf of the CBJ and Bartlett Regional Hospital as follows: CBJ $3,498,144. Bartlett Regional Hospital, $3,628,903. Funding is provided by the Alaska Department of Administration, authorized by passage of HB 69 during the 2021 legislative session. This is a housekeeping ordinance to properly account for these on behalf contributions to the state managed retirement fund and has no impact on the CBJ or BRH's finances. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there anyone in the room wishing to testify to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the assembly adopt ordinance 2021-08 B AM AU as written and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that ordinance is adopted. Item 15, Madam Clerk.
Mayor, this is ordinance 2021-08, version B as amended AV. An ordinance appropriating $28,226,000 to and the appropriating $2,495,600 from the manager for the city and borough of Juneau's fiscal year 2022 operating costs. Funding provided by various sources.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
This ordinance appropriates $28,226,000 and deappropriates $2,495,600 for the city and borough of Juneau's FY 22 operating costs. Following departments and funds require supplemental budget authority in FY 22. Airport, this ordinance appropriates $383,000 of Federal CARES Act funding for required repairs and maintenance upgrades at the airport. Docks, $335,000 of docks funds provides for extraordinary costs associated with hiring seasonal part-time limited staff required to meet unfunded new Coast Guard security regulations pertaining to dual identification verification. Hospital, $2,000 of supplemental authority is needed to support increased labor costs due to staffing shortages and an inflationary pressure on materials and commodities. Funding provided by hospital funds. Risk management, this ordinance appropriates $1,452,000 of risk management funds for health and property insurance claims that exceeded budget estimates. Pandemic Response Fund, this ordinance provides budget authority to transfer federal ARPA funds for the replacement of lost state marine passenger fee revenue and the local government lost revenue relief grant to the general fund. This ordinance also appropriates nearly $1 million for CBJ's fiscal year 22 COVID-related costs funded by FEMA revenue. This ordinance appropriates the remaining authority of $7,123,300 and deappropriates $2,495,600 for housekeeping items, including aligning budget to actual transfers, liquidation of the waste management and library minor contribution funds, and the repayment of a refunded port bond with bond proceeds. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Is there anyone in the audience wishing to speak to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move that the assembly adopt ordinance 2021-08B as amended AV, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. Item 16, Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is ordinance 2022-42. an ordinance providing for a property tax abatement program to incentivize the development of higher density housing.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The Housing Action Plan and Juneau Economic Development Plan identify property tax abatement as an incentive to encourage new housing development. Building on an existing provision for downtown housing, this ordinance proposes to expand tax abatement for qualifying new housing developments borough-wide. Only housing developments on a single lot that remain under common ownership would qualify. This incentive is intended to help address Juneau's shortage of adequate and affordable housing, which the Assembly identified as a high priority in its 2022 goals. This tax abatement would sunset on October 1, 2032, which will induce a future review to determine if the program is accomplishing its aims as designed. Assembly Finance Committee discussed this topic at the July 7, August 3rd, and September 7th, 2022 meetings. I recommend you adopt this ordinance.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Are there any members of the public that wish to speak to this ordinance? Which one do you want to come up first? Mr. Hannah. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you'll have 3 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of the Assembly. Thanks for a chance to talk about this. I'm Dave Hanna. I live out on the Back Loop Road. And this is one of those things where it sounds really good, it looks really good, feels like it'll feel really good, but there's unintended consequences with an action like this. One of the things that's obvious is the loss of tax revenue. Over the past few years, we've seen probably tens of millions of dollars of properties come off the tax rolls as they being acquired by nonprofits and tribal entities. And this is a serious loss of revenue to the city. So if we have a chance to offset that, we really need to take advantage of that. And interestingly enough, I don't want this to be misconstrued, but often developments like this will put probably a disproportionate burden on city services than some other developments will. So, you know, we're talking about emergency services and everything else. But the fact is we are talking about a serious shortfall on revenue. It creates winners and losers. When you give this sort of a significant offset to somebody to build new apartments, you're effectively punishing the people that have already stepped and made the investment in the community. And if we do have a downturn in the community, the people that take advantage of this now are going to have a real rent advantage. If people have to lower their rents, they can lower their rent 10 or 15% most likely. And it's complete offset compared to the people that are paying property taxes and have done this all along. This could very well lead to is the existing properties could go downhill, because if there's an offset in revenue and they're not making as much money as they should, what happens is maintenance and improvements to the properties. So I would just ask you to bear in mind that, you know, we all have burdens to bear, and most everybody is willing to bear their share of the burden, but they want everybody to bear their share of the burden. They don't want it to be unfair. And this, in my mind, creates a very unfair situation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hannah. Any questions for Mr. Hannah? It looks like we have a couple. So Mr. Smith, I saw yours first, and then Ms. Stream, and then Ms. Glashevsky.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hannah. I think it's probably generally agreed upon that there is just not enough housing being built in Juneau. If not this, what should we be doing?
Mr.
Well,
Hannah?
I would really like to applaud the fact that the city is looking at getting rid of more land. If you do want to sell the land at below market value or give it away, I have a little bit of a problem with that. But if you make it so it continues to pay property taxes, if you put it in like the land trust models where those properties still stay on the tax rolls and they pay property taxes, so there's an equal burden amongst all the developers in that regard. The offset goes to the people that are buying the properties. Some years ago, I helped put forward a bill for creating new subdivisions. But I put sideboards on it. So the idea was to give you an incentive to get it developed. But the minute it was developed and it had the ability to earn income, the taxes kicked in. There was no free ride. So if you wanted to do something like that now, I mean, if the city felt perhaps they could give a free building permit to get it built, I'd say, okay, do something like that. But don't make it so it continues to be a burden to the whole municipality for years to come, because they're not paying their share of the taxes. I would look for short-term incentives that give these projects an initial boost, but don't let them continue to enjoy an unfair advantage for years to come. In my mind, that's just not fair.
Ms. Treem?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Mr. Hannah, when you say that developments like this put more strain on city services, can you explain what you mean?
Yeah, since I'm not a member of the police department or the fire department, but I know that anytime you have high density housing, that neighborhood is going to get more calls than low density housing. And there's going to be more traffic on that street than there is in low density housing. So there'll be more maintenance on the street, and they're going to be someplace where they need snow removal, they need services. So all of these things are creating a cost to the city, but they're not paying for it.
And Ms. Glaszewski?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hannah. I had some of the same questions that my colleagues just had, and I'll add another. This is for 12 years. It seems like a long time to me. What's your comment on a smaller number of years?
I've always looked at a maximum of 5 years on any of these things. If you can't get over the hump in 5 years, maybe you don't have a good project.
Thank you.
Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Hannah, for coming and testifying this evening. My question is, downtown has not experienced the level of growth and development. In fact, downtown has lost units if you look at the last decade. And so would you be less opposed to tax incentives to help building in an area like downtown where all the easy land is gone and any project is going? If people were going to be building downtown, they would already be building downtown because some of those spots have been available for some time. Would you be as opposed if this was limited to maybe just the downtown section of town where we have not been experiencing development, and that could be the thing that could maybe help out? Or please.
Well, I think by eliminating the parking requirements, you've already given some new developments a real leg up. I mean, it puts them on equal footing with the old units downtown that did not have those parking requirements. So I think that was a huge boost to them right there. Maybe the demand's just not there, and that's why we haven't seen anything. I think you can't create something that isn't needed. So I'm not sure how I really feel about that, but once again, I would not go for a long-term abatement. I would cap it much shorter, like 5 years, for example. Like I say, if your project can't get over the hump and be profitable within 5 years, well, then maybe it's not that good of a project, and maybe we don't need it.
Ms. Hughes Candies?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thanks for answering these questions, Mr. Hannah. I had some of the same ones. I'll ask you another. You spoke to being supportive of CBJ, perhaps giving or getting rid of public land that we have. Short of that, we have developers right now where we don't have development meeting the supply, I should say, is not meeting the need. I think everyone can agree on that. Do you feel that the city has a role to play when the supply is not meeting the need?
Mr. Hannah?
I do, and there are some incentives. There's some tools you could use out there. One that's been discussed off and on, for example, is one of the biggest costs of developing new subdivisions is the infrastructure. Years ago, on one of the myriad task force I served on for affordable housing, I put forth the idea that perhaps the city borough could fund the cost of the street and utilities and whatnot, but get paid first. So if somebody wanted to put in a new subdivision, the city would loan them enough money to build the street and put in the utilities. But as each lot was sold, I mean, pick a number, but I would think 60% of the sale would go straight back to the city. So the city got paid, and pick a number. So when the subdivision was, say, half built, the city was paid off. That's something you could do. And I would like to add that if the city is going to dispose of some land for affordable housing, I would like to see the value of that land, that amount of money, taken back out of the affordable housing fund that you funded with 2 or 3 million right now, and go back to the lands department, because the city does have other lands that if they had that money to work with, for example, there's property up on the top of Goat Hill. The city has some beautiful property up there behind a subdivision that was already built that they could be doing some planning on and getting it out there. I mean, the city has multiple parcels. So if we're going to start giving land away, that money should be pulled back out of that affordable housing fund and get rededicated to something else where we could make more land available.
Thanks.
See no further questions. Thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Mr. Coogan.
Wayne Coogan, Hawk Bay. I echo everything that Mr. Hanna said. I could add some details. One, well, as far as housing goes, there's a constellation of points that feed costs, and we could be here all night talking about them. So, for example, let's look at the one at issue here, property tax. Now, as a general rule of thumb, and I can show you, I can explain this in detail at a later time if you need, but as a general rule of thumb, the property tax on an income property, which is apartments, for example, let's say you have an apartment building, 20 units of apartments. The income or the property tax on that building is roughly 1/12 of the annual revenue from the building. That's gross revenue. That is not net operating income, the gross revenue. In other words, the landlord is in business to collect 11 months worth of rent. The 12th month goes to the city. All right. So as a rule of thumb, if that 1/12 figure increases or decreases, it's a little bit out of the normal. All right. So that's a rule of thumb that most people don't know about. And there's other things to look at. Net operating and the capitalization rates are different things. Now, looking at the constellation of costs, there's a big one, a big, huge, I would call it a supernova out there. One of the stars that are hitting costs, and that is freight. We are an isolated community. We have a effective monopoly on freight here. This is a very unique situation here. Most people don't realize that we are the largest city in North America that has no road access. All right. So if we're going to look at this thing here from a bigger perspective and think big and beyond just what's in front of us, we need to look at maybe mimicking some of the things that are done around the state, and that is have a municipally owned freight terminal out North Douglas or something that we can then contract out, sublet out portions of it to operators, much like the airport does. You'll notice how the city owns it, but they don't run airlines. I would say it's the same. We could compare it to that, and we could start attacking and unbridling the economy here, because truly it is, Mr. Hanna hit the nail on the head. It truly is the costs. That's what's hitting us. In my lifetime, I remember I could go out and clear land and dump the soil anywhere on anybody who wanted it. I could just dump it on their property for free. Now we have to pay something like $60 a truckload to dump it somewhere in a special location that we have to add mileage to it. Everything's at cost now that never used to be at cost. So we could go on and on forever. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Coogan. Any questions, Ms. Gladishevsky?
Just to clarify, are you urging us to not pass this or to pass it or to amend it or what exactly?
It's most important to me that you be informed, but I would say I have to agree with the thing. If we're going to do it, let's look at the incentive here. If you've got people that already own apartments and that 1/12 that they have to pay, that's passed to the tenants. So we're not doing that to the new ones. So if we're going to do this for incentivizing only, 5 years should get it. As far as an incentive goes, 5 years should get it. 15 years, that's like, I think you did that to the Riverview one, which is a special situation that's nonprofit and it's assisted living. It's a unique thing. I mean, it makes sense to do something one-off there, but what we're talking about here is free market incentives should not be so lengthy, I don't think.
Okay, so no further questions. Thank you for your testimony. Anybody else wants to testify to this ordinance? Seeing none, we'll bring it back to the assembly. Ms. Treen.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move ordinance 2022-42 and ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Ms. Gladishevsky.
Yeah, I object. I've had problems with this. I didn't think we have talked about it with all the right people. And some of my concerns were brought up by Mr. Hanna and Mr. Coogan. So I would find the place where it says 12 years and make it 5. Anybody know where that is?
Page 36.
Mr. Bryson, help me out. Say that again.
Page 36.
Yes, sir.
Line.
Uh-huh.
4.
I would move an amendment for page 36. Duration of tax exemption, section H that starts on 4. And instead of 12 consecutive years, I would move that it say 5 consecutive years.
Object.
Then I'll just speak to this. We've talked about it in finance a few times, but again, we never had developers in the room. It seemed like a good idea. Anyway, I just think that 12 years is a long time. To the point of this to me is to incentivize the building of housing. And I would hope that 5 years would do it.
All right, thank you, Ms. Gladishevsky. I see Ms. Tree, Ms. Hughes, Scandies, and Mr. Bryson. Oh, sorry, didn't see you. You're tucked in now.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will object to Ms. Gladishevsky's amendment. Like she said, we did actually talk about this 3 different times in the Finance Committee, but I don't think everybody was there for all of those meetings. And we talked about it even before that when it came up with the senior assisted living and then when we did it for downtown. So we've certainly discussed this and we've certainly looked at the math behind it. And I will say in support of keeping it at 12 years, that's nationally about where other people's tax abatements are. I think that is kind of what the best practice is something in that range, maybe even a little longer in some locations. And there are many other developers who I've talked to who have told me how that affects their financing. So yes, we want housing to be built, but they need money up front, not in year 12, but they can use this tax abatement, this guarantee of tax abatement to get the financing to even build the project. So if we make it shorter, that limits their ability to get financing based on that tax abatement. And I think we wouldn't see anything happen because of it.
Thank you, Ms. Tree. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I will object strenuously to this amendment. I will echo that we've looked at the math and that informed our length of duration. But I'd also like to note that when we talk about having the right people in the room and speaking to the right people when we're discussing something like this, in addition to developers, I'd be interested in speaking to the tons of people in Juneau who can't find housing, or the people who are moving away because they can't find housing, because I think that is another motivator. I mean, I know we're all on the same page. We all want to see housing get built, so I don't mean to suggest that you don't. But based on the math that we looked at before, and based on our shared desire as an assembly to move the needle a little bit, I think leaving it at 12 years will be best. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm not sure how to feel about this because 12 years to me seems just a tad bit too long, but 5 years seems a little bit too short. But the part that I have heartburn with this is that the person that is the rich person in this transaction is the person that receives the tax abatement. We are benefiting the richest person in the transaction by incentivizing housing through tax abatement. Because while we would like to believe that somebody who is receiving a tax abatement, which lowers their cost for development, would naturally have a lower cost rent, but we know that the market would set the rent rate probably as likely. That's all I have to say about it. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple of things. I'm actually objecting primarily because I think that this section H on page 36 of the packet applies to all of the tax abatement, and I'm seeing a nod from Mr. Palmer. So we can't actually modify this to 5 years because it would apply to senior housing and downtown multifamily and the high density residential as well. So we'd have to change that in some way. I have been trying to get input from the development community on this measure and have not succeeded. I value the input that we have tonight, and I worry, we've talked about it within our echo chamber here, and we haven't talked a lot, at least I haven't talked successfully a lot with other people in the community. I think that we are feeling almost desperate to get housing built. And this is an effort to do that, but we have people here that have come today and have raised some really good issues. So I support the idea of the amendment to 5 years. I think that maybe this can be a kickoff and sort of a wake up to the people who testified and to us that we need to find ways of perhaps the building permits for free or something. Other ways of encouraging development. I think we all really want to encourage development. So with that point, I'll leave that. I'm good.
All right, thank you. Ms. Wall. Turn your head.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't remember the conversation about the math. I'm pretty sure it was before I was on the assembly. I believe the downtown tax abatement was passed right at the beginning of my term. So some of those conversations would have happened before that. All that to say that I'm supportive of the tool we're using and agree with Ms. Hale that I don't think there's a harm in more discussion on this. And so I don't know the order of operations, whether I can make a motion to move this now to an
Table mine because I did it wrong, but
well, I was just going to make a motion to move this to a committee of the whole meeting.
Okay, Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would object. We have talked about it a lot, and I think if people miss those meetings, I'm sorry, but we had them scheduled and we did the meetings where we did our homework on this. And this assembly really loves to talk about things to death. And I think that it's time that we actually take some action and move forward on this.
Thank you,
And
Ms.
also, I'd say that Finance Committee is probably the better place for it.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Ms. Glashevsky.
No, I would support Ms. Wall's motion.
Are you
I was going-
removing your amendment?
I am, because I would need to consult with the attorney about where it goes, because it doesn't go here. So I would remove my motion and support Ms. Wall's.
Okay,
and
just to be clear, Ms. Wall, what is your motion?
To send this ordinance to a committee of the whole meeting or whatever committee meeting we think is appropriate.
Thank you. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm going to object to that motion. And I am often guilty of this as a solo member of this assembly. So I'm going to say it to myself out loud and maybe for the good of this assembly. But I think we need to be really careful to not let perfect be the enemy of the good. Or did I say it backwards? Okay. I think we have, a few things that anyone in Juneau could say, yeah, that's a major problem. What are a couple of our most basic problems? Housing, childcare, and these are problems across the state. I get the desire to get it perfect. I just think that for some of the things that we rush on and some of the things we take our time on, we seem to have it backwards. So I feel like we've examined this one quite to my satisfaction. And I'd like to see us not make wild mistakes because we're desperate, but I don't feel like this is us making a wild mistake because we're desperate. I feel like we've done our due diligence on this. This is a useful tool, and I'd like us to move it along rather than send it back to a committee. I feel really strongly that the right thing to do is to act on this tonight. So I will object to that motion.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies. Mr. Bryson.
Again, we were looking at that section of H. I was interested in maybe shortening the time, but understanding how this goes to all tax abatement, I would definitely want us to keep moving forward. While I understand that this does provide an advantage, but it's the advantage that we're trying to create to get people to build what we want them to build. So my actual suggestion to the developers that see this as unfair is please go build there and take advantage of this. I would not want to stop the motion and the momentum that we have towards throwing the kitchen sink at getting housing. We have done more actions towards getting housing built at this time of crisis, and I would hate for us to get tripped up on a little detail. While we could spend more time on this and really fine tune it, we could spend another year talking about it, and that'll be another year that families are having a hard time, that another house doesn't get built, that another year that no development happens downtown. So while I get all the reasons that this could maybe not be the right reason, it has more pros for us developing housing in Juneau than it has cons. And I'd hate for us to delay correcting the housing crisis right now. I'm going to be in support of moving this forward tonight. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Glashevsky.
Just briefly, I said I supported Ms. Wall's motion. I just wanted to say why. We've talked about it 3 times, but we haven't heard from the community. I mean, the first development community we've heard from is tonight. So we've talked to ourselves. I think we should try. Ms. Hale tried, and why isn't the development community here supporting this if they would think it's a good thing? They should be here supporting it. So I don't know, maybe they don't think it's a good thing. That's who I want to hear from, not just us. So that's why I support sending it. And I agree with Mr. Bryson. I don't want us to do this for a year. But where are those voices that we want to hear from? And we've just heard from 2. And they're not the whole community. Where are all your friends? Anyway, that's why. Thank you.
Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Good discussion on this. Obviously, we're all trying to do things to lead to more housing. I think we all want to do the right thing. It's obviously an evolving situation as the Fed raises interest rates. I mean, it is a continually changing things. We're seeing changes in the market already. I've had kind of a sense of I guess I've wanted all along to know what is it that the developers need so we can build housing. And I know it's many things, but a list of that would be very helpful to us. I also think a list of actions we could take with some metrics and, cost benefit and all that. Maybe I'm neglecting and forgetting or need to look back through past packets, but it would be nice to see what those options are and where to go. This does take away 12 years of tax revenue. So it's a long-term thing. From what I've heard tonight, I'm supportive of sending back to the cow and continuing to focus on it with promptness. Was that the word we swore in today? So I appreciate all the work that's been done on it, but I'll vote to move it back to the cow as well, and hopefully look at other options and hopefully hear from the development community on what we need to do to build more housing. So thank you.
Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I don't love this focus on what do developers want exclusively. And it's kind of a bummer. I think we're all open to hearing ideas and we only hear from you when you don't like something. So please come tell us what you do want. I would appreciate that. But developers aren't the only player in the housing market. And I think that to put all of our focus on what they are asking or what they want is irresponsible, especially to, as Ms. Hughes mentioned earlier, the people who actually need the housing. What do they want? What do they need? So I think that we've looked at this from a lot of angles, and we don't need to go back and ask a specific group of people that would stand to either benefit or not benefit from this what it is they want. We've done the work already and we should just move forward.
Thank you, Ms. Tree. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I've already spoken on this, so I'll keep it really brief, but I just wanted to add a few things. I'll echo Ms. Treem saying that developers are not the only players within the housing market. There's a lot of different players. I would ask us to ask ourselves, why are developers not developing land currently? And if we're saying, well, where's this vacuum? Why don't we hear from them? They're not developing the land that they have, and they're not coming and asking for anything. I'd also point out, we just had a task force that had some developers, some CDD, some assembly members. And that was for the whole purpose of that, as I understood it, was to say, hey, tell us what you need. Tell us what's your sticking point so we can unstick you. And one thing came out of there, and I'm knowing what it was, knowing that that's not really fully, and that's not to slight the work of anyone in there. But if we're waiting, if that's our waiting point, we might be waiting a very long time, not because we're working for an hour, but but we're not getting that from the development committee. So I would say, let that not be our waiting, but I think we've all waited in, so I'll call the question.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candies, Ms. Hale, and then I get to talk after her.
I just wanted to point out that more than one thing came out of that task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. I'm torn on this one also. I hear every point and I appreciate the developers coming in and chatting today. But I would say that I'm probably leaning towards moving it forward. And if Ms. Gladaszewski in the cow wants to make amendments later, I think they could do that. But for right now, we could move forward and we can fine tune it later. But I would agree with those that have spoken that we've been working on this for quite some time. So with that, we are voting on Ms. Wall's amendment to move it back to the cow. Madam Clerk, please call roll.
So, Madam Mayor, just to clarify, I had Miss Wall's motion to move it to whichever committee is appropriate. Is the COW the appropriate committee that we're voting upon?
The cow or finance, whomever wants to take it on.
Okay. So on Miss Wall's motion, Miss Wall
Yes.
and Miss Dream,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Miss Hughes Candies,
No.
Miss Hale,
Yes.
Mr. Bryson,
No.
Wallahi Doc,
No.
Miss Gladishevsky,
Yes.
and Mayor Weldon.
No.
Motion fails, 4 yeas, 5 nays.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Ms. Glaszewski.
I would ask for an at ease to consult with the attorney.
5-minute at ease.
That's what I think, but I don't,
Will bring us back to order.
All right.
my crystal ball is broken.
Both answers are right.
Ms. Glashevsky.
Okay, apologies to all for the amendments on the fly, but here it is. So on page 6 of 8, the part about duration of exemption, I would move to strike section H completely and take that language and move it into the 3 sections as follows. So section 1 on page 2 of 8, it says assisted living for seniors. And I would add at the end of that, the language from H on page 6 of 8. So the additional language for the section for seniors would say the same thing it says, tax exemption approved under the section shall be for a period of 12 years, beginning on January 1 of the first fiscal calendar year and after the final approval of the application. Same thing for downtown multifamily, section 2. The end of that would be new language, adding that it was for 12 years, the same language. And section 3 for high density residential would add language, the same language, only instead of saying 12, say 6. I'll be happy to say that again because I see it's quite complicated. So
she
take the language about duration of exemption.
Yeah.
Yep. So 12, take the language out of section H, delete that entirely. Move that language to the end of section 1 on page 2 for senior citizens. So that exemption would last 12 years. For downtown multifamily, add the language for 12 years. And for C, for section 3 for high density residential, make the language say 6 years. I'll be happy to repeat
Who
that.
has questions on the amendments? All right, do we have objection? Yes, we do. Ms. Wall, I'll let you speak first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll object for the same reason that I wanted to send this to committee. I like to make decisions with good amounts of information and time to think about them. And if I have to choose between 12 years and 6 years, I'll go with the 12 that we have been talking about, even if I would have preferred to have a bit more time. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Wall, Ms. Trim, Ms. Hughes Candies, and I guess I'll be out. Oh, Mr. Bryson. Go ahead, Ms. Trim.
Oh, I don't need to speak to it. I've already spoken.
Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thanks, Madam Mayor. Yeah, I think you are all in favor. I mean, I think you're all aware of my many reasons for being objecting to this. For those who initially supported a motion to send it back to committee, I would say that an on the fly amendment, I don't see how, with hearing from a limited audience, that this is superior to the work we've done, which I understood was characterized as an echo chamber because we weren't hearing from the public. But I would be even more reticent to change to with no staff work or anything on that, but to just cut it in half based on testimony. So I will strongly object to this.
Thank you, Ms. Hughes Candy. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I actually find this to be the compromise by leaving downtown multifamily alone, because where downtown is the part that I'm the most concerned about needing incentives. By limiting the rest of the community to only 6 years, the consequences of our actions could be less than what some of the developers have described. So for the things that we need the 12 years on, it leaves it. And for the area wide, it has a lighter 6-year, which again, I think it sounds like a great compromise. As we develop more incentives to incentives area wide, we won't have this 12-year tax abatement sitting on top of us, which could prevent other incentives from being effective in the future. So a compromise for the area wide of just 6 years, I think gives us and future assemblies a little bit more flexibility while still keeping the very important 12 years in the downtown and for seniors. Thank you for the time, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Bryson. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'm really torn on this one. I initially supported the idea of the 5 years. I've learned in the break that a 12-year period for tax abatement is common in many locations because it takes 12 years to actually for a multifamily housing project to break even. And so for that reason, I support the 12 years. I know we've already voted and we've already voted it down to go back to the cow. I would implore my fellow assembly meeting members to consider, can't get it back to the cow now, but to consider the fact that communication since the pandemic is fractured, and things that we think are happening or things that we are dealing with and we know are happening, other people haven't known are happening. And I think that has happened with this. I think even though I have made that effort to get this out to the builders community, I've worked with the chamber, it didn't work, obviously. I'm going to support the 12 years, even though I know that there are good arguments for trying to do something different, but we don't have good information. We don't have Mr. Chambor here. We don't have somebody who can provide us information, which is why I wanted it to go back to the cow. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Hale. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For staff, I guess. If a developer has an idea for a project, and I mean, I guess developers speak with you, potential developers speak with you about what they may need to make a project work. And if for some reason 6 years isn't long enough, they might come and tell you or us that could make changes. I mean, people reach out to you and say, here's what I need to make a project happen. Is that true, or could you speak to that?
Through the mayor.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So just let's just zoom back a little bit. This concept of tax abatement for economic development was authorized by the legislature about 4 years ago, signed by Governor Walker. Here in our assembly chambers, gave municipalities broad authority to determine what economic development was. I think everybody recognized at the time that that was a powerful tool that should be used carefully. When we went down the tax abatement path, first with senior housing and later with downtown, we had a close eye on Anchorage, who had passed a tax abatement for a geographic area that I think was pretty broad. For multifamily, and they did 12 years in Anchorage. So early on in our discussions, we followed that. For what developers need to make a project pencil out, I think our testifiers touched on it. It's really dynamic. I mean, they're juggling construction costs and cost of freight and availability of labor, and cost of finance, interest rates, and predicting inflation and trying to guess the market. So I don't know that a developer can ever tell you what they need, at a point in time that's a good and durable answer. Because, any developer that I've ever talked to is constantly evaluating all those factors. The conversations I've had on tax abatement run the gamut. Some developers, it's not a building product that they're interested in pursuing. Other developers I've talked to think that this is a really significant assist for multifamily housing projects. I think from the staff recommendation, I think our perspective is that across the community, we lack all kinds of housing products and different incentives and help for each of those products is necessary. So this one targeted towards multifamily housing, that in particular is a housing product that just isn't really being developed in the community right now. The testifiers touched on competition between existing buildings, and all I can say is, from my perspective, the economics of a constructed multifamily building that's capitalized and leased up is going to be very different from a new build that's going to have to carry that construction cost, and that's going to have to weather the volatility and risk of bringing that new product on. So I hope that kind of touches on it. I don't think there's one answer. And when I talk to developers, they're constantly gauging the market and really asking themselves, is this the right time? Is this the right time? Is this the right time? And when it's the right time, they want to go. And if they can't go, they're frustrated. I think you hear that a lot right now.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Do you have another question?
Just a statement now, thanks. I guess not with that, but knowing that it's a dynamic situation, I'll support the amendment in that we start small, and if people need something more, we have tools in which to help. Affordable Housing Fund and other choices. So I'll support the amendment. Thank you.
All right, with that, I'll chat briefly too. I appreciate again the gentleman's testimony tonight, but we just had testimony from Mr. Human not too long ago that was very supportive of this tax abatement. And we have a 440 unit development on Glacier Highway is looking at this. So by passing this amendment, we will pull the legs right out from underneath them from 6 years, from 12 years to 6 years, just so you guys understand what you're doing. If you don't pass this. So again, I hear what the developer said. I get that we're losing some revenue, but I'm going to side with housing on this. And if those folks want to change some things, I would recommend we not do it on the fly and somebody bring up an amendment through the process. With that, we have an amendment. Madam Clerk, an objection. Madam Clerk, call roll.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is for amendment by Ms. Gladishevsky, removing section on page 6, section H, and putting it at the ends of section 2A1, 2A2 with the 12-year language, and then in 2A3 to change the 12 years to 6 years. So Ms. Gladishevsky.
Yes, yes.
Walaki Dog.
No.
Was that a no? I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was no.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Wall,
No.
Ms. Treem,
No.
Mr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Hughes Candies,
No.
Ms. Hale,
No.
Mr. Bryson,
Yes.
Mayor Weldon.
No.
Motion fails, 3 yeas and 6 nays.
All right, so that brings us back to the main motion. Did we have a main motion ever? So long ago? By Ms. Treem, that's right. Seeing none, that motion passes. Item number 17, Madam Clerk.
This is ordinance 2022-6, version B, P as in Paul, an ordinance appropriating $700,000 to the manager for a pre-development loan for Gasno Lodge Apartments LLC funding provided by the Affordable Housing Fund.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
The ordinance would appropriate funding from the Affordable Housing Fund for a pre-development loan for the Gasno Lodge Apartments project, a 72-unit apartment building in downtown Juneau. Phased loan disbursement will mitigate CBJ's risk and liens against the property and building materials further secure the loan. CBJ's support of this project is intended to help address Juneau's shortage of adequate and affordable housing, which the Assembly identified as a high priority in its 2022 goals. However, slope stability along Gaston Avenue has recently put new development in focus due to the event on September 26, 2022. Assembly Finance Committee reviewed this request at the August 3rd and September 7th, 2022 meetings. Applicant has provided documents requested by the Assembly, which are included in the packet. Notably, attachment A depicts contributions of each member. Given the policy considerations, I do not have a recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. And we have Mr. Sangson, I'm saying that wrong, I know, in the audience to ask questions as needed. Who has questions? Mr. Bryson.
Maybe Mr. Manager can answer this question. My understanding is that they were using a federal housing loan. Once they secured the property, their next phase was to go and secure a federal housing loan that would then erase our loan. So that way we no longer had lien on any of their stuff because the feds would then be leaning on all their stuff. Is that correct, sir?
Mr. Manager.
Madam Mayor, yeah, so I think we touched on this at the August and September Finance Committee meeting. So as the applicant represented to us, they were intending to use a pre-development loan to get local permitting and do some preliminary site and utility work so that they would be more ready for HUD financing. And the HUD financing, as they stated, would require that our lien and our loan be gone by that time.
Here's my real question, Madam Mayor.
Mr. Bryson.
Thank you. What is the applicant's plan if the HUD fine does not come through, or if HUD rejects the project? What's plan B, and what would happen to city money that has already been put into the project? How would we recoup our funds if the HUD project is not approved?
Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. I think the applicant would be better suited to talk about Plan B, but when we talked about this at the finance committees, my general recommendation was to look at this as a short-term activity that would be collateralized, a little bit complicated by the land and improvements to the site, and I think concrete blocks for retaining walls. And what happens after that would be a separate issue. If the Assembly recalls, there was some discussion about the actual value of the underlying land. We had different values, from the assessed value to an appraised value. There was a significant gap between those. And in the recommendation that I came up with in August, trying to find a path, I picked a median number in that. But as for a Plan B, I think the applicant would be the one to answer that.
Might you come up and say your name correctly for the record? And please answer the question.
Yes, my name is Steve Sangson.
And what's the direct question, Mr. Bryson?
If the HUD financing is denied, what would be your plan to either complete the project or to repay the city? Or how would you advance if this is not approved by HUD?
Well, there's several other options for financing. Alaska Housing has a program that could possibly cover it. We've also looked at the possibility of direct local financing to be able to do that in a way similar to other projects that have been recently financed. So at the time that we put the package together in a proposal a little over a year ago, the HUD financing was the preferable long-term financing. It was 40-year instead of 20 or 30. It had a lower interest rate and a variety of those kinds of things. The issue with phase one and phase two of pre-construction is that the HUD financing, as soon as that kicks in, they expect you to pour concrete within 10 days. And as you know, from the topography of the hillside, it'll take a season of site work before we're ready to pour concrete. So that necessitates essentially doing all the site work prior to the building. So that also adds to the value of the property. The raw land plus improvements plus entitlements adds to the value of the land. So I think the city's investment is secure in the value of the property that's going to be improved as we go through the process.
Thank you, Mr. Sangson. That answers my question.
Ms. Gladysevsky and then Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question for the manager. Yeah,
Go ahead, sorry.
okay. Regarding the hazard issue. We didn't focus on this possibly enough the last time. So I'd been supportive of this, thinking that if everything does not go according to plan, we would eventually get the land and then could sell it. If, however, it was in a high hazard zone, which it is in the new maps, that would not happen. I mean, we would probably not be able to or want to. Who would we sell it to if it was in a high hazard zone and they couldn't develop property? So talk about the hazard issue. Right now in the current adopted maps, this is in moderate because of a study that was done for the property, but the new maps have them in a high hazard zone. And I don't know if that old study, well, anyway, I'll stop talking and ask the question about what designation is on the land affect our risk?
So we're all looking at you, Mr. Manager.
Thank you, Mayor. So the old maps did have it in I think severe is the right term. And then there was an engineering study done that reduced to moderate hazard in the old maps. And in our current code that goes with I guess the old maps are actually our current maps because they're the ones that are adopted. It allows applicants to figure out how to come up with engineering solutions in moderate hazard zones. In the new maps that we have currently for informational purposes, the property would be in a higher hazard zone, but we have not talked about the companion policy piece of how property development in the new maps would be allowed or restricted. So it's a little bit difficult to predict. You can sort of blend the new maps with the old theory, and the old theory would have been greatly restricting development in high hazard areas. So if we kept that old theory with the new maps, the land might not actually be developable for multi-family housing. If we developed a new theory that accommodated engineering solutions, it might be available for development. In some ways, we probably won't have answers to some of these types of questions until this applicant or some applicant runs the gauntlet of the permitting process for a development in a hazard area, moderate, severe, old maps or new maps, however it's categorized, or we work on our policy implementation of that. It kind of depends on how the Planning Commission balances those maps and those code issues. So a little hard to say, but it is, I think, underlying your question, it is possible that we could do a loan. The developer could not be successful and the loan be secured by land that we receive that is not suitable for development. That is one possible outcome.
Mr. Smith and then Ms. Stream.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Similar, but I think different. Mr. Sankson, did the recent tree fall landslide, whatever it's being called, did that impact your ability to get insurance, or has that changed the nature of any of those key pieces for your potential development?
Mr. Sampson.
Madam Mayor, to answer your question, I don't know that it's affected our insurance or our ability to get insurance. What's happened is a rather isolated incident on a hillside that was previously clear cut for many, many years that hasn't been mitigated. So those kinds of tree falls are almost expected after 80 years. So the real issue with the hillside is more one of mitigation, I think, than designation and calling it a hazard zone. The hazard needs to be addressed. The hazard exists mostly on city property that was inherited from former mining and industrial property. So it does need to be addressed. We're concerned about it as well. The hazard zone designation is probably one of the largest reasons we've had difficulty in raising capital to be able to do a multifamily project downtown. It's somewhat vague and ambiguous, and as the city manager said, more public policy needs to be directed to how things happen in this area. But I really think that mitigation is a stronger case than designation, than just saying, no, don't go there, don't build there.
Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have a question for Mr. Watt on the same theme. You very delicately say that the event on September 26th has put this project in new focus. Has CBJ put a new focus on any of its own operations, plans, services, et cetera, because of the event on September 26th?
Mr. Watt.
Thank you, Mayor. Having been gone for a bit of time, I would say that personally, I do not fully understand the facts of the event on the 26th, but I do think it is something that we need to understand to the extent possible. One of the actions the Assembly has been asking that we're remiss in doing is bringing forward recommendations on how to implement the new maps and what that means. I do think we have quite a bit of work to do. And I think that this is very difficult. If you think about the spectrum of choices, on the one hand, we could prohibit development, and from a policy perspective, that's fairly simple. And on the other hand, we could make no restrictions, and from a policy perspective, that's also pretty simple. We're kind of in the middle of wanting to manage development, and that's actually quite hard. I think the event on the 26th will inform that discussion. I think we need to look at other more recent projects and what they've done. There's an apartment building to the south of the proposed Gas Snow Lodges project that has a retaining wall built on the side of the road. I think we need to look at that. That was built in the 2000s, and be thinking about, was that an appropriate mitigation, and would that have been effective in the face of a slide of some size or tree fall event of some size? There's some thoughts on that. I don't know if I directly answered the question.
Ms. Treem.
I was thinking more of day-to-day things, if any changes been made, and maybe Mr. Barr would be more aware if any of those things have happened since September 26th.
Mr. Barr.
Through the mayor, thank you, Assemblymember Treem. I can tell you that it's certainly something that we talk about a lot more since then. It feels like the 26th was just yesterday, and in some ways it kind of was. You know, I think an event like this puts kind of front and center on our radar the need to think more and address you know, the potential risk for future events like that from a policy perspective. So as Mr. Watts said, key to that is going to be bringing the hazard map discussion back up at a likely, haven't had a chance to talk in detail with the deputy mayor about this yet, but likely at a committee of the whole meeting in November, and then going forward from there.
All right. I don't see any more questions, so I have a couple for Mr. Sankston. Number one, since we heard from the other developers, will the tax abatement help yours?
Yes.
Excuse me, Madam Mayor. Yes, it will. It's somewhat essential. We first put this together and talked to Scott Chambor about it about 4 years ago and realized that our break-even point was since then, the dynamics of finance have changed somewhat, and with the interest rates, it's possibly pushed out a little bit further, but 12 years seems to be what we came up with as well as a time in which property tax abatement would be most beneficial. It is an operating budget subsidy. We can't capitalize that. It's not a tax credit. We can't capitalize it and raise any additional capital from getting a tax abatement, but it is an operating cost benefit. Multifamily housing in Juneau tends to run about a 35% expense ratio to revenues. And that's high compared to a lot of places, but due to freight and fuel and a bunch of other things, Juneau is a higher cost operational area. Tax incentives does help quite a bit.
All right, thank you. And then my second question, and so Mr. Tucano has the land, and so what basically quote unquote skin in the game does Verde Infrastructure's partners have?
Extensive, both personal investments as well as a great deal of time over 5 years putting together this project, developing not only a technical feasibility with the site, but also financial feasibility with the project, including looking at a variety of different financing alternatives, really trying to find different ways to make this work. Totaling up the hours, it's far an extent of the dollar amount that's there. But anyway, that's what it is, basically putting the whole project together.
All right, thank you for that. Okay, with no further questions, we'll look for a motion. Wahalgadock,
Yes, I move ordinance 2022-06 BP and ask for unanimous consent.
any objection? Mr. Palmer.
I may have missed it, but was there any further call for public testimony on this one?
I apologize. Let's take the motion back for right now. Any members of the public wish to speak to this ordinance? Mr. Hannah. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record, and you have 3 minutes.
Yes, my name's Dave Hanna. I live in the back loop. Thank you for a chance to talk about this. I'm not going to speak for or against this project. That's a naughty situation that you can enjoy all unto yourselves. Yeah, I don't envy you your task. But what I am going to speak about is the fact that this is just one of probably a half a dozen places in Juneau that's unsafe, not necessarily due to the landslide effort, but for the fact that it only has one access. We have one road in and out of the hospital. We have one way in and out from Cordova Street, the entire Blueberry Hills area. We have one road out of Simpson Avenue area. We have one road out of Gastineau Avenue, and that really hit home a couple of weeks ago. So if you are going to move forward with this, and even if you're not going to move forward with this, I implore you to start working on these. In my mind, it should be at the head of the list for the public utilities, for that commission. You should be looking, it should be like the number one thing is making our community safer. You should be working with AELMP and just drag them to the table and say, hey, we had a temporary road out of there when Gastineau Avenue was rebuilt. We could build that street through there. We could have one-way traffic on Gastineau Avenue. You could have parking along one side of the street maybe on the uphill side, they could push the snow to the downhill side. It could get opened up in a heartbeat. People could actually drive through there. There wouldn't be jockeying around. It would be safe. So, yeah, that's it. I really hope that we can consider these access issues. I would put Bartlett Hospital first, put Gastineau Avenue probably second, but Cordova Street, that might go second for me. You look at the number of people that live up there. We have a disaster waiting to happen up there and on down the list. We should be seriously looking at this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hannah. Any questions for Mr. Hannah? Seeing none, and I believe we are talking to ALP about that very topic. And I think we're taking care of the BRH one also. And you forgot that we only have one road to Douglas. Mr. Coogan. Please state your name and area of town you live in for the record. You have 3 minutes.
Wayne Coogan, Ock Bay. I have to take a free kick after Mr. Hannah. So, yes, I concur with the mayor. There's only one access to North Douglas, but there are plans underway and we're funding them to do a North Douglas crossing. But indeed, there's only one access to everything north of DeHart's. So it's conceivable that if something happens out there, an ambulance could serve the area from Haynes or from Skagway. So it's just a thought. We do need to consider access as the utmost priority in every respect. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Coogan? Seeing none, thank you for your testimony. Any more public testimony on this? Mr. Bibb? All right, with that, Hogdoc gave a motion. Any objection? Seeing none, good luck on your project, Mr. Sankson. All right, does anybody need a break before we move on? Okay. Let's come back at, what time is it actually? 9:05. New business. Madam Clerk. You're doing this one.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is hardship and senior citizen disabled veteran late filed real property tax exemption applications.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Mr. Manager.
There are 4 property owners that have requested the assembly authorize the assessor to consider a late filed exemption for their property assessment. The assembly should consider each request separately and determine whether the property owner was unable to comply with the April 30 filing requirement. I recommend you act on each of these applications individually. They are in your packet on packet page 59, starting on packet page 59.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would say that the assembly members reviewed each of these applications, and I would recommend that we accept the requests and forward them to the assessor for review and action. And the requests are as follows: for hardship exemption from Ronald Crenshaw, John Gucker, Wilma Tagaban, and for late file senior and disabled veteran exemptions, Gary, Timothy, and Wilma Tagaban. And I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Glaszewski. Any objections? That motion is passed. So that brings us to staff reports. Mr. Manager, are you going to start, or are we just going to Madam Clerk?
Directly to Madam Clerk. Thank you.
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of the Assembly. In your packet on packet page, starting on packet page 65 is the statistical report regarding the recent October 4th municipal election, which we certified on the 19th of October. Sorry, the days have somewhat seemed to blend together. Rather than going through each statistic line by line, I would open it up to questions from the Assembly if you have any. This was a pretty successful, low-key election. The 2 races that were close were on Proposition 1 and Proposition 4. And as you all know, the results, I won't belabor them. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I would like to give a shout out to all the election workers, as well as to the Steve Tata from our Engineering Public Works Department, as well as the contractors who brought us the vote by mail ballot processing center on time and within budget in time to actually conduct this by mail election here in Juneau.
Thank you, Madam Clerk, and we would be remiss in not thanking our 2 clerks, Madam Clerk and Madam Deputy Clerk. So thank you for all our 3 clerks, sorry. Apologize, Andy. Our 3 clerks.
That was going to be my next wonderful thank you to the Assembly, if I might, Madam Mayor, is to announce that we have a new 2nd deputy clerk. Thanks to the Assembly. Andy Hirsch has joined our office as our 2nd deputy clerk. Her focus will primarily be on elections, about half her time, as well as records management. But as you know, in the clerk world, we do it all. So she's training up on all things clerk related. So it's great to have Andy joining us in the clerk's office.
Welcome to Andy. And again, thank you to our clerks that did a great job. So who has questions for the clerk? Ms. Wall and Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you again, Madam Clerk, for all your work. I have 2 questions about rejected ballots. These stats here say that there was 172 ballots not cured after being sent a cure notice. Is that primarily people who didn't respond, or is it people who didn't respond, or they came back and there was still a mismatch, or a mix of both?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Assemblymember Wall, primarily, we're looking at those who did not respond to the cure letters that were sent. I think when we were working with Canvas Review Board, we may have had 2 or 3 that had responded, but still were not counted. One of them just anecdotally sticks in my brain where they did not provide a personal identifier. We sent them the letter saying we need a personal identifier. They sent the letter back with just a signature and still no personal identifier. So just a few small number of those, but the 172, vast majority of those are those that did not respond to the cure letters.
Excellent, thank you. Second question is the line right below that. Ballots received via USPS after election day with no or illegible postmark. Is this the category that last year we had several hundred in this category, and the much lower number, is that because, you know, people had to affix a stamp? And are these 10 USPS mistakes?
Madam Clerk.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. And yes, as a matter of fact, this is exactly the contrast between doing business reply mail and requiring the voters to affix their own postage. And there were, out of those 10, I think 3 of them that had some sort of postmark, but it wasn't legible enough to actually read the date on the postmark. And then the remainder had no postmark whatsoever and came through the USPS and were received after Election Day.
Thank you.
Ms. Hale.
Thank you. Following up on that excellent lead, I wanted to commend you, Madam Clerk, for recommending to the Assembly that we not have the business reply mail, and the Assembly for actually going through with that and having us affix a stamp. I also believe that in your instructions, you point out to people that when they can, especially if it's near election day, to actually watch the clerk postmark it. And I really appreciate that. I know none of those 10 people didn't want their votes to be counted, but that's such a small number. And so I'm really proud of the process for working this way. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Hale.
Okay, other questions for Madam Clerk? I have one because we always get asked it and you always have an answer, but we'll repeat it. Why is there so many CBJ registered voters?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So that goes directly to what qualifies as a registered voter in state statute, and the state of Alaska Division of Elections is the one that maintains the voter rolls. The way the statute is written, individuals who are registered to vote do not get removed from the rolls if they move away with the intent to remain an Alaskan resident. You know, you've got a lot of military voters who register to vote in Alaska. They get shipped out elsewhere, but they maintain their state residency. So like the rest of the state, anyone who moves away who doesn't actively deactivate their voter registration stays on the Juneau voter rolls. There are, as you see on the page 2 of the report, 1,350 ballots that came back as undeliverable. Those get forwarded to the state. They go into what's called a list maintenance process. The state is required to do extraordinary outreach to the voter before they're allowed to even remove them from the roll due to undeliverable mail. So we don't have control on that process, but that's why you see the number you see for the total number of registered voters in Alaska. The other part of that is that because we do have some of the voters in list maintenance mode, we did write the code such that we were not required to actually mail ballots to undeliverable addresses. So that's why on the second line of the memo, you'll see that only 26,242 ballots were actually mailed to voters, because the rest of them in that list that we received from the state were in a list maintenance mode.
Thank you. Mr. Bryson?
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Do you anticipate that number will go down again next year as we continue to have undeliverable ballots and we start to, now that we're doing mail-in ballots, will we continue to remove people year after year off the rolls that aren't voting here in our community?
Madam Clerk?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Mr. Bryson. The number will constantly be changing because the state is constantly doing list maintenance. However, this is also a state election year. You'll have probably a surge in number of registered voters. So the numbers will constantly be fluctuating, but I don't see it going down a huge significant, maybe 1,000 or so based on the number of deliverables that we send out to the state. But you know, there's kind of a balance with the newly registered and folks moving in and out of the community.
Ms. Hale?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Madam Clerk, you gave me a really great tour of the ballot processing facility, and I really hadn't realized the extent of checking and cross-checking that every ballot that is counted is valid. There's only one ballot that's ever counted. And I believe in some ways that's a counter to people being worried that people are on the rolls who have been here for too long or, you know, have moved away. You have a very thorough process of checking. And I think that that gave me an enormous amount of confidence in this whole process. Thank you.
Thank you.
Anything further? So just to really reiterate for those listening in, so we had total number of accepted counted ballots was 9,137 and total number of rejected ballots was 231, which is a much smaller number than the year before. So thank you again to the Madam Clerks.
Thank you.
Who is doing the next topic? Is that you, Mr. Manager? Number 20?
Madam Mayor, item 20, authorization to proceed to Dawson Construction for pre-construction services for Mendenhall wastewater treatment plant SCADA under the existing construction manager at risk contract. So packet page 73, there's a memo from Director Kester. Either late August, early September, the Assembly authorized an alternative procurement award to Dawson Construction. And the initial project amount was approved, and in that authorization, we told the Assembly that we would bring successive amendments back for approval. So in support of Director Kester's memo, we would like to spend and contract with Dawson for another $150,000 on the SCADA project and look for a affirmative motion supporting that. I'm happy to answer any questions, and I think Ms. Kester is online as well.
So Mr. Watt, you need a motion of some sort?
Motion would be appropriate.
Okay, so I didn't realize a motion. I thought it was just an information item, so I will have to recuse myself for the same reason before. So I will pass the gavel to Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So we're on item 20 and we need a motion of support. Ms. Dream.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Mayor. I move that we direct the manager to proceed to Dawson Construction for pre-construction services for Mendenhall wastewater treatment plant SCADA under existing CMAR contract and ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Dream. Are there any objections? All right, that item is passed. Back to you, Madam Mayor. I was going to pass you my microphone, but you don't.
Nope, I have got my own. Thank you. All right, so with that, any more staff reports?
Getting late.
Staff reports, thank you.
All right, so Assembly reports, I'll keep mine fairly brief. First of all, why our city manager was frolicking all over Europe, and from my roots in Scotland. I just wanted to say a big thank you to Mr. Barr for steering the ship through some pretty rough waters while Mr. Watt was gone. And also a thank you for Ms. Kester for doing a great job with our tree falling event in September. So thank you for Ms. Kester. Also, we give her a round of applause. With that, I have talked to a few of you about our upcoming retreat. What's the date, everybody? December 11th. Some of you are looking at me blankly. So December 11th. I think I would like to do things like to do little things a little bit different this year. So I don't think, since we have this body of people, we will send the goals out and where we are with them here in a few days. Mr. Barr is going to take care of that for me. And if there's any burning things, let us know. But I don't see that our goals are going to change much. However, I would like to spend the quality time with my 8 friends on doing some deep dive into some of these goals, for instance, housing and that kind of stuff, to come up with kind of a general consensus of the direction we should move as a body, and to give staff some direction. And of course, we always look at the budget too, looking at Mr. Rogers. So if you have any burning topics to discuss, remember, we want to have them pretty high level. Please forward them on to me and we'll make a list. And if it gets too big, we will by the group get rid of a couple or save them for another date. So with that, that concludes my report, other than, even though I know he's not listening, I have to say happy birthday to my son Cody. So okay, so these are the old committees and liaisons for this meeting. So we'll go with Ms. Gladaszewski, Committee of the Whole.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Committee of the Whole has not met in a while. And so we didn't do anything. The next meeting is 2 weeks from today, November 7th. That's my Committee of the Whole report. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Perfect. Finance.
Finance Committee also hasn't met in a while. Our next meeting is Wednesday, November 2nd, and then we will have our pre-retreat finance meeting on Wednesday, November 30th. So not the first Wednesday of December, because we'll all be in Anchorage for AML, but the Wednesday before that. So mark your calendars for the 30th.
Yep. And keep in mind that we're only going to have 2 finance meetings before our retreat. So if you have any budget stuff you need to brush up on before our retreat, please get together with Mr. Rogers. Lands, Ms. Hale.
By golly, Lance hasn't met either. And I'm no longer the chair, so I can't tell you when it's gonna meet.
There you go. Mr. Bryson.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Public Works met at the end of September, right before the election. My note said legislative priority list has momentum, EV charging has funding, and waste management has 27 new gas collection wells in the dump. And that concludes my report for Public Works.
All right, thank you. And Human Resources.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The last time the Human Resources Committee met, I reported out on it at our last meeting, and we haven't met since then. So ends the Human Resources Committee report.
Okay, well, so we're just going to do this a little differently. We'll just start with Mr. Bryson. If you've done any liaison reports, because I know a lot of people, other committees haven't met, or if you have any comments or questions, now is the time. We'll just go through this once. Mr. Bryson.
I have no report, Madam Mayor.
Perfect. That was the best ever. Ms. Hughes Candies.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I'll try to be really short. The Planning Commission has moving things in the works, so it warrants all of our attention to pay attention to what they have going on. We introed an ordinance tonight that was related to their last meeting, the alternative residential subdivision. They discussed the 440 unit thing. They heard from a lot of public testimony. What we introed tonight is related to that. They didn't at the last meeting, but they will be looking at it again. I think they'll be looking at it November 8th. They will be meeting tomorrow, and they'll be re-looking at the Glory Hall thing. So if you want to pay attention to that, that's tomorrow evening. speaking of developers, the Juneau Commission on Aging is working on a list of senior-friendly construction choices and applaud them for being really proactive. There's things that are cheaper to do when you're building a unit than are a lot more expensive to retrofit a unit. And I think they're making positive inroads. And then the only thing to know about the PrAC is pay attention, because at some point Parks and Rec Department would like to move towards a more empowered PrAC with less, Treadwell board, whatever else board, eliminating some of those. And then my only other news is that I've been appointed to a housing task force from the National Association of Counties to represent Juneau. And I will be going to a meeting on housing in Washington, D.C., November 16th and 17th. So I'll bring back what I get.
Perfect. And you need 8 chaperones, right?
8 of you to go with me.
Yep. Ms. Tree.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the last JCOS meeting, they discussed the legislative priorities. So that list goes to various boards before it comes back to us. They did have some questions about what our process is with that list, and specifically, like if something comes up that they think is a really great project or some opportunity for a great project, but it's not on our list, can they bring that to us anyway? Or are they kind of limited to the things that we decide to put on that list? So I don't know that we've had that policy discussion, or maybe we could clarify it in a future discussion about that legislative priority list. I gave my thoughts on the matter, but I didn't want to speak for the whole body on what we do around that list. I attended the chamber dinner, which was their annual dinner, which was really fun, and got to see Craig Dahl pass the baton to the new executive director. So that was very moving and was, as always, a very fun time. On October 5th, so shortly after the event of September 26th, I watched a webinar hosted by the Virtual Alaska Weather Symposia, which is an event series of the Alaska Center for Climate Assessment and Policy on Sitka's Landside Risk Dashboard. It was really timely. I think it was scheduled before the events of September 26th, but was very timely, and I saw some Juneau residents on that list as well. So I think their information is really fascinating, and whether it's something that could be done in Juneau is a really interesting question. And I would urge staff and assembly members to either go watch that, or perhaps we could have them come to a CAL or something and talk to us, because they have some pretty interesting things. And the way that was structured was also interesting to me. It's a partnership between a lot of different groups who have various inputs into that. So it was an interesting hour to listen to. And then finally, I just want to note the passing of Dr. Saul Neely, who was a professor at UAS and I think had a big impact on Juneau before he and his family moved south, and a big impact on his students and his colleagues, and he will be sorely missed. So I want to send my condolences to his wife, Carrie, and his daughter, Mila.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. And I also was at the chamber dinner, and it was very touching, Mr. Dahl exiting, and congratulations to Ms. McMillan. Mahogany.
Yeah, I missed the last school board meeting, and if okay, and if he thinks appropriate, I'll ask Mr. Palmer if he wouldn't mind updating the assembly, because there was some discussion that I think warrants the assembly's knowledge just as to what took place during their last meeting. Is that okay, Mr. Palmer?
Mr. Palmer, he eagerly jumped up to the mic.
I'm smiling, Wahagi Doc. The school board has had some tough meetings, and they have some tough meetings ahead of them. At the last board meeting, the school board actually adopted a 457 retirement plan type option for the teachers, or for their employees, which is helpful. But the real headline was the school board introduced, so kind
has 2 readings on big policy items. The school board introduced their audit and their financial statement, and then they followed it up with a finance committee meeting a couple days later. And the school board has some tough financial forecasts in front of it for this current fiscal year and next fiscal year. So the audit concluded that the school district actually ran a deficit for last fiscal year, and the deficit continued over into this fiscal year. And so they're trying to figure out what to do. And there's some really tough discussions because like the assembly, they haven't finished labor negotiations specifically with the teachers union. And so that's not built into the school budget this year yet. They've got some decrease in enrollment that's on the forecast for this year. So they've got some really tough conversations that are before them this current school year, this fiscal year that we're in addition to some of the news you've seen in the papers about Anchorage and other communities forecasting the so-called fiscal cliff for next year. So I think there's a fair amount of challenging discussions that the school board's going to have, and there may be a little bit of pressure on the assembly as those conversations continue.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. And then the only addition is that AFN met for the first time in person in 3 years. Elders and youth also met, and huge success. I think, the anticipation of how many people we thought would be about half the normal size, but in reality ended up being almost double. So we had a lot of people really anxious to be together in person, which is probably why I ended up with a cold. So that's it for me.
All right, thank you. Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. At the last SRRC meeting, that committee reviewed legislation that we approved at our last special assembly meeting, but they also had a pretty generative conversation about kind of their purpose, how it's been going, kind of just continuing to poke at the reality that reviewing ordinances sometimes doesn't get at the systemic issues that group wants to be addressing. And so I encourage them to take some time for a work session prior to our retreat to put their thoughts together on where they see their work moving. I think they tried to find some dates this month that wasn't successful, but Mr. Barr is and the clerks are gonna try to make sure they find some time before our retreat to put their heads together. Docks and Harbors also met since our last meeting. They've got a few things going on that I think will continually come before the assembly. Some of that was introduced tonight. November 3rd, they have a public meeting for an omnibus regulation change that will come before us. I also just wanted to say, now that I'm not the Docks and Harbors liaison, I'm not sure if this was my responsibility or not, but I think it's probably overdue to have the assembly jointly meet with the Docks and Harbors board, because they just have a lot of things on their plate that will be coming in front of us, including a rate study that I think would be good to talk about as two bodies. That's it for me.
Thank you, Ms. Wall. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Juneau Commission on Housing and Homelessness has met a couple of times since we last met. Couple of highlights: the warming shelter is now open, and then St. Vincent de Paul is going to be again doing their in-person Thanksgiving meal as well as their Thanksgiving food boxes again. So options to volunteer and contribute there. The Eagle Crest board met. A big action they took is they took action to raise the wages an additional 7%. So I think during our budget process, jointly with the assembly funding, with general funds funding about half and Eagle Crest funds funding about half, they raised them 14%. They're raising them an additional 7%, and that's hopefully going to get them into kind of more an industry norm, as well as just help alleviate some of their staffing shortages, which are which are significant now and getting more problematic by the day, but hopefully that helps. There's a second crossing open house, well, very far away, December 12th. As part of the Alaska committee, I went to AFN. I don't think that we have talked about going to Southeast Conference, even though that feels forever ago. I know a number of others did as well, but again, that was a long time ago. And that's all I had. Thank you, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Smith. Ms. Hale.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I gave my swan songs to the Chamber Board and the Bartlett Board, and I just wanted to pass one thing on to the Assembly that happened at the Bartlett Board. I said I thanked them for hiring the new CEO, who is doing a great job, I think, and for their work. And I also talked about being the liaison and being on the Assembly during COVID. And I said, in some ways, I felt like we have a good Assembly, but so much of us had been wasted on COVID because we had to work so hard on that, and it exhausted us. And Dr. Lindy Jones, after I spoke, Dr. Lindy Jones came back and he said, and this is for all of you, he said, Michelle, I just have to disagree with one thing that you said. You did not, the Assembly was not wasted on COVID. The Assembly rocked COVID. And he talked about how many lives that Juneau and the Assembly and the hospital had actually saved through our efforts. So I think that's for all of us.
Thanks for that share. That sounds just like Dr. Jones. Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I took the opportunity of not having meetings to go away. So I was in the East Coast seeing leaves and doing theater and seeing family and all kinds of fun things. So that's my only report, Madam Mayor.
And that's the best report other than Mr. Bryson's. With that, we have a presiding officer report. Mr. Palmer, I'll go to you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is Goldstein Improvement Company tax appeals request for a stay. Goldstein Improvement Company filed 6 appeals regarding the 2022 property tax assessments. The property owner appealed the same items to Superior Court and to the Assembly. The Assembly accepted the appeals on August 1st and on August 29th for the limited purpose of determining if the Assembly had jurisdiction and then assign them to a hearing officer. Prior to the hearing officer starting, the parties agreed the Assembly appeal should be stayed through the end of the year while the parties await Superior Court decisions from the 2021 tax appeals. I recommend the Assembly by motion tonight order 1, further proceedings in the Goldstein Improvement Company appeal stayed until January 31st, and 2, the parties shall meet and confer in January to propose next steps.
Thank you, Mr. Palmer. Ms. Glaszewski.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I would move that the Assembly order that further proceedings in the Goldstein matter the appeal stayed until January 31, and that the parties shall meet and confer in January to propose next steps. I ask for unanimous consent.
Any objection? Seeing none, that motion passes. And just to let everybody know, everybody is back. So like there's the Planning Commission tomorrow night, the SRRC is tomorrow. So please look at your liaisons because they're probably meeting this week. So just a heads up on that. I believe the school board's meeting. So just be aware of all that. Anyway, any member of the public wish to speak at public participation on non-agenda items in the room, but seeing we don't have too many left, we will move on to our executive session. Ms. Treem.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I move the Assembly recess into executive session to discuss matters, the immediate knowledge of which may, got to look at my notes, adversely affect the finances of the municipality, specifically an update on collective bargaining, and I ask for unanimous consent.
Thank you, Ms. Treem. Oh, Ms. Wall.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. For the record, I have a conflict of interest as relates to negotiations with IAFF and will recuse myself from the discussion and will leave.
Don't say that so gleefully. Thank you for that. Any member of the public object to us going into executive session? Any assembly member object to us going into executive session? We will reconvene in executive session in 5 minutes.
Well, Gaduk, I think they're gonna just call you.
Okay. Thank you.
And this will end the Zoom portion of the meeting tonight. So thanks everyone for joining. We'll see you next time.